Hello students, how are you all doing? I'm hoping that all of you are doing well, you're keeping well, your revisions are going very well, right? So today we are going to continue with our places new series with respect to the places that were there in February 2026. In that regard, let's look at the first one. This is the Hudson River. Now, why is Hudson so famous? Because at the mouth of this river, you'll find New York City, one of the most famous cities in the world, right? Let's look at some of the basic aspects about this river, right? Why is it so important? Where is it located? What are some of the other aspects that we can understand from this vicinity, right? So this is the continental United States of America. It has a lot of important river systems. Some of the important ones are which one? So this is the Colorado River, where you will find the Grand Canyon, right? Then there is Rio Grande, right? That is forming the boundaries between USA and Mexico. Then there is Missouri and Mississippi River, right? And here in the northeastern United States, you will find this river that is known as Hudson River. Now, where is it located? Which is the area that it is coming from? So, at the borders of USA and Canada, there are some important lakes, right? These are which? These are called 5 Great Lakes of North America, right? In that regard, I'm hoping that most of you know about these lakes, or at least have heard at least once. And there are 2 lakes, that is Lake Ontario and Lake Erie, that are seen on the borders with respect to New York State and Canada. Now, the first bit of confusion is that there is New York, a state, and New York City, right? There are 2 aspects here, that New York is a state also and there is New York City also. So, first confusion many students have is regarding this particular naming itself. Okay? Next, what you can remember is that this river is flowing in north to south direction, and then it is having its mouth towards the Atlantic Ocean, right? Where is it originating? It is originating in New York State itself, and which is this mountain system. Now, if you know about the eastern portion of America, you might be knowing about Appalachian mountain system. This particular river is not rising in the Appalachian Mountains. Appalachian Mountains are till Pennsylvania. New York State is having a particular mountain system called Adirondack Mountains, right? This is Adirondack Mountains, right? It is in Adirondack Mountains that Hudson River is originating, right? So, first important aspect is that it is not in the Appalachian, right? Next, it is forming the boundaries between New York and New Jersey. That is a small bit, but that is not as important as that. You must have an understanding that it is in the northeastern United States and it is not rising in the Appalachian Mountain, right? Now, these are very cold regions. So, it will be, especially the upper reaches will be snow-fed, and then as it moves forward towards the south, it will become a rain-fed river, right? Now, the next important aspect, these 5 lakes, these 5 Great Lakes are huge in size, right? Why are they huge in size? Because you must be knowing that these 5 Great Lakes store as much as 20% of the total fresh water on earth, right? 20% of total fresh water on earth is there in these 5 rivers, these 5 lakes, right? In that regard, what are some of the important aspects? That from this particular section, from this Lake Erie, there is a canal that is going and then connecting with Hudson River, right? This is the way through which these Great Lakes are then getting connected to the Atlantic. That is why New York becomes such a huge center of economics, such a huge center of global trade, right? Because it is connected to, of course, Atlantic trade as well as the Great Lakes trade, right? So it is a very, very important aspect. Which is this canal? So it is connecting through Lake Erie. So Erie Canal is its name. It's a very, very old canal, almost 200 years old, right? In that regard, next important aspect is that New York City in itself is now a very important center of trade, commerce, right? It's a great city. It's a city that many people visit as a tourist destination also, right? A lot of things are situated there, right? It is, even though it is not a capital of USA, but it is considered to be among the most important cities from the United States of America. These are some of the important aspects. Of course, there are other, if it is a financial hub also, and there are other aspects that you can associate with New York, right? So these are some of the basic things. Next important aspect is that after it is reaching the Atlantic Ocean, this particular river is forming an estuary, right? Now, what is the difference between an estuary and a delta? We have already covered it in the previous classes. Can anyone write in the comment section what is the difference between an estuary and a delta? In Indian context, if you can remember that there are deltaic formations in the east coast and estuary formation on the west coast, right? With respect to, say, for example, if you are comparing between Ganga and, say, for example, Narmada, right? So if these things are, you are able to connect with this, you will be able to remember this. Let's look at one of the questions related to this particular topic. Let's see how many of you are able to correctly answer this. Are we done? Shall we move ahead? Now, let's look at the next place. This is the Takashima Island. Now, where would you find Takashima Island? It is, thankfully for us, not a territorial dispute between China and one of its neighbors, but a dispute between South Korea and Japan, right? It is situated in Sea of Japan, right? And it is a dispute between Japan and South Korea, right? It is currently being administered by South Korea, right? And there is a Korean strait that you will find that is in this particular area, just for our own information. Now, what is the dispute all about? So, if you actually look at it, these are not really islands. These are just volcanic rocks. These are volcanic rocks, basically very small rocks. But because under UN clause, I'm hoping that you have heard about UN clause, right? This is the Convention on Law of the Seas, right? Under UN clause, it needs to be an island so that you are able to claim an exclusive economic zone. And what is the definition of exclusive economic zone? So it can go up to 200 nautical miles into the sea, right? It is around 230 kilometers, right? So up to 200 nautical miles, you can claim your exclusive economic zone. You can fish there, you can extract polymetallic nodules from there, right? So due to this particular definition of EEZ, that it requires an island and not just rocks, these small volcanic rocks are known as Takeshima Islands in Japan, right? Now, what are some of the other aspects? So it is a very rich fishing ground, right? So it becomes economically valuable. Next is, there is a lot of national identity politics going on between South Korea and Japan. As you may know, that when Japan was expanding during the early 20th century, it had taken over South Korea. So there is that particular colonial aspect to it, right? Then there is strategic dimension to it, because these are regions that are quite a bit hot in context of China-Japan rivalry, China-US rivalry, right? So it is important for their regional security also that they are able to claim such important islands in the Pacific Ocean, right? The important thing is that you must have an understanding that these are not really very big islands. They do not have any freshwater source. Mostly there are very few people situated in these lands, right? But they have strategic importance, they have economic importance, hence we are looking at them, and they are not with China and any of its neighbors, but Japan and South Korea. All right, so let's look at one of the questions from this particular section. All done. Shall you look at the next one? This is now Lake Urmia, right? Where would you find Lake Urmia? This is in Iran, right? This is lying in the western corner of Iran, right? Iran is quite a bit in news, especially all the major geological points and strategic points, right? We have already seen Strait of Hormuz in this region. There is Persian Gulf. there is Caspian Sea in the north, right? Now, where would you find Lake Urmia? Is it connected to Caspian Sea in any way? No, right? It is having no outlet towards the sea, so it is a endoheric lake, right? It is having no outlet into the sea, right? What are some of the major regions here? So you will find Azerbaijan and Armenia, again a conflict area in use, right? Then there is Turkey and Iraq towards this particular portion, towards the west and towards the south, right? In that regard, what are some of the other aspects? So if you look at this particular map, you will see that it is rapidly shrinking, right? It is rapidly shrinking. This is from 1998 to 2014. It has shrunk even further. Now, what are some of the reasons? So, it has no outlet to the sea, so it is not going to receive any waters from the sea. Then what are the other aspects? So, here there were rivers that were contributing their fresh water into this lake. Now, those rivers are getting dammed. So, because of damming of inflow rivers, the water has reduced. Then there is a lot of evaporation going on, right? So, it is losing a lot of water, right? But it is not receiving as much water, hence the shrinkage, right? There are other aspects that the rivers that were feeding into it are getting diverted for irrigation purposes. So, then it is also reducing the water inflow, right? There are other aspects also, say for example, because of groundwater overuse in this particular area. So, these are some of the major reasons, but among them is that the rivers are getting dammed and they are getting diverted for irrigation purposes, right? So, in that regard, we are seeing that this lake is shrinking very, very rapidly. Of course, it will lead to biodiversity loss, it will lead to loss of water availability in the people living around this region, right? So, in that regard, let's look at one of the questions from Lake Urmia. All right. Now, the next place is a very, very deeply disturbing place that is known as Thwaites Glacier. Now, why are we saying that it is very, very disturbing, very, very monitored in an extremely monitored place? Because this is known as Doomsday Glacier, right? Now, what is it about that it is called a Doomsday Glacier? Where is it located? Let's look at it. So, it is located in West Antarctica region, right? This is located in West Antarctica region. Now, this is the land area, right? And what you are finding is that this is a glacier. This is a glacier that is reaching out into the sea, right? It is so big that it is considered to be 1,92,000 square kilometers in area. It's a huge glacier. It is called widest glacier in the world, right? Now, why is it called Doomsday Glacier, right? Because it has so much ice that if it melts suddenly, right, if it falls into the sea and melts suddenly, what can happen is that it can raise global sea level by up to 10 feet or 3 meters, right? That is its potential that is the potential damage that it can cause. It covers all the major important coastal cities of the world, including Mumbai, including New York, right? Many of the coastal cities will be submerged if the mean sea level rises by up to 10 feet, right? Now, what are some of the other aspects? Where would you find it? So, of course, it is in the West Antarctic area, right? There are other aspects regarding it. So, there you will find Pine Island Bay. The sea is Emerson Sea, right? And this particular area is inside, of course, the Antarctic Circle, that is 66.5 degrees south, right? These are some of the other aspects. It is very big indicator of the severity of climate change, right? That is why it is monitored so closely by the world's climate scientists, right? In that regard, the next important aspect would be that it is a threat to not just climate security of the world, but also economic, but also it will lead to a lot of climate induced migration, from especially the island countries, right? So it is a very, very big threat in multiple different ways, right? It is not just about climate, but also about economics. It is also about national security. It is also about different aspects with respect to migration and other aspects. All right. So in that regard, let's look at one of the questions from it. All done. I would suggest that at least try and answer these questions in your own head at least, right? Because it will help you revise what you are already studying, and that really helps with the recall factor when, if and when you need it in the exams. All right. So now let's move on to the next place. This is the El Chichon Volcano, right? Where would you find it? It is in Mexico, right? It is in Mexico, very near to the Central American region, right? Now, it is a very, very explosive volcano, right? It is a very, very explosive volcano. If you look at this area itself, there are two plates that are interacting here. These are Cocos plate and North American plate, right? And Cocos plate is subducting beneath the North American plate. That is creating this stratovolcano. है ना? We have already had a good understanding about what are stratovolcanoes, what are their structure, right? We have seen in multiple cases also before also. So what we are going to look at is this particular volcano and why is it so feared, why is it so much monitoring going on with respect to this particular volcano. So what happened was in 1982, there was a huge eruption at this volcano, and it was so huge that it caused global climatic impact. What happened? So it released, this huge eruption released a lot of sulfur dioxide, into the atmosphere, leading to the creation of a lot of sulfate aerosols, right? Sulfate aerosols. And these sulfate aerosols in the atmosphere did what? They almost formed like a blanket and they reflected back sunlight, right? They reflected back sunlight. Now, if the sunlight is not able to reach the surface of the earth, or not as much sunlight is able to reach the surface of the earth, what will happen? A global cooling effect happened, right? A global cooling effect took place, right? That is why it is so important that this volcano, when it last erupted, right, what happened? It caused a global cooling effect, right? This is a very, very interesting aspect. Of course, there are other aspects because it is such an eruptive volcano. So it is required to be monitored so that one can prepare for disasters, one can inform the natives there, right? One can inform the air traffic controllers, the flight that are flying in this particular area. So these are some of the basic aspects. Let's look at the question from this particular section. Let's see how many of you are able to answer this correctly. All right. Shall we move ahead? Now, let's look at the largest landlocked country on earth, that is Kazakhstan, right? I'm hoping that you have a basic understanding about where is it located. It is among the Central Asian republics, right? Where is its location? What are some of the important aspects regarding Kazakhstan? So if you look at the map of Kazakhstan, there are some important things that you have to remember. It is of course the world's largest landlocked country, so it will have no access to the sea, right? But there is a Caspian Sea here, right? That is why we talked about Caspian Sea just before, that it is not actually a sea, even though it is named a sea because of its large expanse, but it is actually a lake, right? That is why Kazakhstan is considered to be the largest landlocked country in the world, right? It is sharing its borders with a lot of Central Asian countries in the southern portion. Then there is Russia at the top. Now, this Russian connection is very important because it was part of the USSR region, right? And even more so, a lot of nuclear tests, a lot of space tests were happening in this particular area. It is very close to Mongolia, the second largest landlocked country in the world, but it is not actually sharing a border with it, right? So this is very, very important. Otherwise, it is of course sharing borders with China, borders with Russia in this regard. Then there is Uzbekistan and Kyrgyzstan and other regions, but it is not sharing borders with Mongolia, right, which is the second largest landlocked country in the world, right? Now, what are some of the important aspects regarding this particular area? So here you will find that there are a lot of lakes that you are going to find in this particular region. इसमें से there is Lake Balkhash, right? That is very important. And then there is Aral Sea. Now, Aral Sea is very similar to what is happening with respect to Lake Urmia. It is also shrinking very rapidly, right? In fact, it was in news just a few years back, right? So Aral Sea and Lake Balkhash are very important ones. There are other lakes also that you will find in this particular region, but these two are very, very important, right? This is, if you look at the climatic region, if you look at the vegetation, so it is a semi-arid climate country, right, with steppy vegetation. So semi-arid climate and steppy grassland vegetation. All right, it is very rich. It is very rich with respect to uranium, natural gas, petroleum, right? So this is a very, very important country with respect to energy trade, right? It is very rich with respect to uranium. In fact, during the USSR time, this was one of the major centers of scientific developments when it was part of the USSR. All right. So in that regard, let's look at one of the questions from this particular section. This is very interesting and important. In fact, all the 5 Central Asian republics are quite important. The countries around the Caspian Sea are quite a bit important. So do have a good look at these particular sections. All right. Next one, this is the country of United Kingdom. Now, the first important aspect that most people have confusion is that what is England, right, whom we play cricket with? What is United Kingdom? What is the British Islands, right? So let's look at the first aspect, that what is the difference between, say, for example, England, right? So England is one country, right? When Wales, England, Wales and Scotland is connected. So England plus Wales plus Scotland, right? Then you will form the British Islands, right? So this is the British Islands. And then when all these three are getting, so British plus Northern Ireland. Now, which is Northern Ireland? It is this particular section, right? The northern part of the island of Ireland, right? So when it is adding Northern Ireland to it, then you are forming United Kingdom. So England is one country, right? When it is getting connected with Wales and Scotland that are on the British Isles, then you are forming the British region. And then when it is also adding Northern Ireland, then you are forming the United Kingdom, right? So first important thing. Now, where is it located? What are some of the important aspects? So it is located in the Atlantic Ocean near the North Sea, right? So there is North Sea towards the east and Atlantic towards the west, right? Of course, there is English Channel, and there is English Channel here, right? It is between England and France, right? Not Spain, not Netherlands, not Germany, it is between England and France, right? What are some of the other aspects regarding it? So this particular area is influenced by the North Atlantic drift. That is why people are able to stay here. Otherwise, it would have been very cold region. But because of the warm currents of the North Atlantic drift, they are able to live in this particular area, right? It is, of course, one of the primary P5 countries, है ना, P5 countries in the United Nations Security Council, right? It was one of the most important colonial powers, right? It is a still a very important power, है ना, in many respects. It has already done a Brexit, right? So there are different questions because we are very close to the 10 years anniversary. So you can expect questions with respect to this particular aspect, how good, pro or cons between the Brexit decision, right? In that regard, it's also very important with respect to NATO, right? Because after the country of USA, UK is one of the primary contributors to NATO, right? So in that regard, it is a very important country, and you will find a lot of interesting aspects in this particular area. One of them is, of course, that there is prime meridian that is passing through this particular land, right? Which is a very important imaginary line with respect to time zones of the earth, right? So this is the GMT, Greenwich Mean Time, that it is recorded here, and through this we are looking at the time zones of the world, right? There are other aspects also, but at least these things you must remember. Let's look at one of the questions from this particular section. All right, that covers all the major places from February 2026. If you look at a combined question, try and answer it. Let's see how many of you are able to remember all the things that we have looked at from the earlier places, right? And with this, we'll complete our section for today. We'll look at the March 2026 in the next video. That's all for today. Thank you so much. Wish you all the very best, and let's meet in the next class. Thank you.
For more informative content, like, share and subscribe, and do not forget to press the bell icon to get the notifications.